All right.
James 4, verses 11 and 12. Do not speak against one another, brethren. He who speaks against his brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge of it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you who judge your neighbor? A couple of weeks ago when we were here last, we were looking at the stuff that Jesus had been teaching, and he was talking about being devoted to worldly things at that point in time in the Sermon on the Mount. And he said, be careful what you allow your eyes to focus on, because whatever you're focused on, guess what? That is going to be what your heart goes after in your mind. Our eyes need to be on him. When we're focused on him, nothing else in this world matters. We are focused on him alone. When we're not, hypocrisy takes place. It's easier for people to see and hear what we say and what we do than when we go, but I believe in Jesus. I'm always looking up to Jesus. When they turn around and they see you doing otherwise, it turns them off. So we're going to turn around and we're going to continue now with the portion of the Sermon on the Mount that deals with something that's very near and dear to most of our hearts. Matthew 7, verses 1 and 2. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Jesus shifted to this different topic in there. He went from what your eyes are focused on to something that was very prevalent in those days that dealt with the Pharisees, the scribes, and other lawgivers. They would look at people and hold them to a different standard. They would change and tweak the laws just enough for them to make themselves look good. And everybody else they were able to pick on and say, you need to do better. Jesus rebuked that kind of thinking at this point in time. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. With this command, Jesus warned against passing judgment on others, because when we do so, we will be judged in a very similar manner. Now, I don't know about you, but I really don't want to be judged the way I do anything of that nature, because it can be pretty harsh at times, or I should say it used to be. We all know people that are not Christian that we try and talk to, and we try and tell them about Jesus and what a great job and a great thing it is to be a Christian, and they look at you and they go, I don't think so. And you have to scratch your head and go, I don't get it. Why? And it's because they see other people who claim to be Christians that are living in a manner that is not Christ-like. And they see them pointing fingers left and right. And they go, why would I want to be a Christian when it's no different than how I already am? I don't want people to look on me in that evil way, or that way I'm thinking of that. It is a blanket statement. And Dennis and myself talk about this on a couple of occasions. When somebody will make a statement that lobs every Christian into one lump sum. What they don't realize is they are actually judging by a human standard that they apply, and in essence, guess what? Others look at them and think, wow. And they start judging them. That's what the Bob Marley song was basically saying. And I know I love that song. When I brought up the stuff for the one with the sermon, that was one of the number one songs that popped up. And I scratched my head because I'd never heard it before. And then I listened and I says, yep, that'll work. But these people, they don't understand just what exactly it was Jesus was trying to tell them. They seem to think or hope that Jesus was commanded a universal acceptance of any lifestyle or teaching that there's out there. You have to accept it. You can't judge it. If you do, then you're in the wrong. Just a little later in this same sermon, Jesus commanded us to know ourselves and others by their fruit. You have to have a little discernment in what you're doing. The Christian is called to show unconditional love, but the Christian is not called to unconditional approval. Let me say that one again so that it sinks in. The Christian is called to show unconditional love, but the Christian is not called to unconditional approval. We can really love people who do things that should not be approved of. So while this does not prohibit examining the lives of others, it certainly prohibits doing it in the spirit that it's often done in. That one that says, you are in the wrong and you need to change your ways. What if they don't realize what they're doing is wrong? Did you just approach them in an un-Christ-like manner? Did you go turn around and grab your Bible and start thumping them on the head? Did you start pointing your fingers in their face and saying, God will not approve of this, and if you don't quit, you're going to burn in hell? It's amazing how many times that we see this happen. Let's look at how it was in Jesus' day. There was a situation where something just of this nature was done. An example of unjust judgment was the disciples' condemnation of the woman who came to anoint Jesus' feet with oil. And we find that in Matthew 26, verses 6 through 13. Now, when Jesus was in Bethany, at the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume, and she poured it on his head and as he reclined on the table. But the disciples were indignant when they saw this and said, "Why this waste? For this perfume might have been sold for a high price and money given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you bother the woman? For she has done a good deed to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. For when she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly I say to you, whenever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken of in her memory." They thought she was wasting something.
You need to advance one more.
I guess I didn't press my button hard enough. They thought she was wasting something valuable. But Jesus said she'd done a good work. She had done a good work that will always be remembered. This little lovely, do not judge so that you will not be judged. We break this command when we think the worst of others. We break this command when we only speak to others of their faults. We break this command when we judge an entire life only by its worst moments. We break this command when we judge the hidden motives of others. Oh, I love that one. It's one of my favorites. We break this command when we judge others without considering ourselves in the same circumstances. And we break this command when we judge others without being mindful that we ourselves will be judged. Jesus did not prohibit the judgment of others, but you're supposed to do it with a little bit of discernment. You're supposed to put yourself in a situation that would be similar. You're supposed to look at what they're going through, that walk in their shoes type deal. Isn't that what he said earlier? If they ask you to walk a mile, walk two, to see what they're going through. When our judgment regarding others is wrong, it's often because we judge according to a standard that we set. Not God, not Jesus, but something that we've set. It is common to judge others by one standard, but just like the Pharisees did, but not turn around and apply it to ourselves. That's the horrible thing. That's the scary thing. How would you like to be judged by your own standard? This is the principle upon which Jesus built that command. God will measure unto us according to the same measure we use for others. Now, I used to look at others in a whole different way. I was very judgmental, and I was very condemning, until I read and understood the foundation and principle behind Romans 14, verses 12 and 13. So then each one of us will give an account to himself to God. Therefore, let us not judge one another anymore, but rather determine this, not to put an obstacle or stumbling block in a brother's way. I no longer had to be watching what others were doing. I no longer had to correct them. I no longer had to say, hey, what you're doing is wrong. I'm not the one that has to defend them. They have to stand before God and explain themselves when the time comes. I only had to be responsible for me. No one else. Now, do I sit there and think of a couple of examples that I was very condemning on and very harsh on? Well, I can always throw in a little bit of drug use, a little bit of alcoholism, a little bit of homosexuality, a little bit of abortion. Are they wrong? Are they sin? Yes. But did I have to go and get in their face, confront them, and beat them down to let them know that? No. Deep down, if they look at themselves, they already know it's wrong. They're already being condemned by the Holy Spirit, even if they don't believe in God. The Holy Spirit's still convicting them, beating them down themselves. I don't have to do it. I just have to live my life the way Christ wants me to live it. The way He commands. And show them His love. To show them God's love. This is a powerful motivation for us to be generous with love, forgiveness, and goodness to others. To be forgiving. If we want more of those things from God, we should give more of them to others. According to the teaching of some of the rabbis in the old days, God had two measures that He uses when He judges. One was the measure of justice, and the other was the measure of mercy. Whichever measure you want God to use with you, you should use on other people. Do you want God to be merciful to you? Show a little grace and a little more mercy to others. Don't be so harsh in judgment. Be kind. We should only judge another's behavior when we consider how we want to be judged. Matthew 7, verses 3 through 5. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. This figure of speech is a humorous kind of thing when you think about it. Jesus is giving them a picture, a word picture, that most people would smile about. It's really funny when you think of it. How many of you would sit there and think about a guy with a big old log in his eye and walking around, still walking and talking and trying to help someone else? There might be a literal speck in somebody's eye, but it wouldn't be equal to the plank or the board or the log that's in your own. It's a humorous picture. And I love this one. It's the same one that I put on the front of the bulletin. How can you sit there and have something so big in your own eye? Here, let me help you. And you're going to be beating them over their own head just to get a closer view. A man with a board in his eye trying to help a friend remove a speck from his friend's eye. You can't think of this picture without smiling and being amused. I laughed about this all week as I was doing this message. This silly picture came popping into my face and into my mind, and I would just smile. It really worried some people at the school. What are you smiling about? Oh, nothing. It's all good. An example of looking for a speck in the eye of another while ignoring the plank in our own is when the religious leaders brought the woman to take in for adultery to Jesus. And what was it that He said? He sat there, according to John 8:7b, he who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw the stone at her. The one person in that crowd that had the right to throw a stone didn't. He looked at everybody else and said, if you're sinless, you go ahead and throw that stone. And they slowly but surely dropped their stones and walked away. And Jesus told her, where are those who have condemned you? Go and sin no more. I don't condemn you. Jesus indicates that the one with the plank in his own eye would not immediately be aware of it. How many of us are in that situation? We don't realize that we have things going on in our own lives, that you've got this great big tree coming out of your head, but you're too blind to see it. It just might be normal for you. It is the attempt to correct the fault of someone else when we ourselves have the same or some greater fault in our lives that we're living than this other person. That earned that accusation of hypocrite. Like I said a couple of weeks ago, that is the worst name you can call me. You can call me a racist. You can call me a homophobe. You can call me a whatever. And I know it's not true, so it doesn't bother me. But if you called me a hypocrite, I have to stop and think, am I being a hypocrite about something? Have I done something or said something that is opposite of what I claim? And if I have, that bothers me a little. And then I have to go and talk to God and rearrange my life to get back into that right walk. Jesus is gentle, but when he calls that man a hypocrite who worries about the small things others do and pays no attention to things in his life that are greater, harsher in sin. Our hypocrisy in these matters is almost always more evident to others than ourselves. That log, it says it blinds. How can you see the speck if you're blinded? But I think that you blind yourself to what's going on in your own life because you don't want to deal with it. A good example of this kind of hypocrisy was David's reaction to Nathaniel. Or Nathan, when he came and talked to him about that little lamb that rich man came and stole from the poor man, his only lamb, the pet of the family, and slaughtered it just to go. And David went off. That man, you go get him. You throw him in jail. He needs to make restitution. And what did Nathan say? You're that man, David. Oh, that massive log. By first taking the log out of your own eye, you will then be able to see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Jesus didn't say that it was wrong for us to help our brother with the speck in his eye. It is a good thing to help your brother with the speck, but not before dealing with what's going on in your own life. Matthew 7:6. Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. After he warned us against judgmental attitudes and self-blind criticism, Jesus reminds us here that he did not mean to imply that people of his kingdom suspend all discernment. You cannot do that. They must discern that there are some good and precious things that should not be given to those who will receive them with contempt. For example, you're trying to witness to some folks, and they're not ready to hear the pearls of the gospel, that treasure of the gospel. Will they accept it? Or will they sit there and look at you and go, yeah, and berate you, belittle you, take what you have and throw it down and crush it underfoot because they're not ready? Or what about the Christian who has done something wrong and you go to talk to them in brotherly love, and they're not willing to listen and accept what is being said in love? Are they taking what you've given them and throw it on the ground and crushed it underfoot? It is amazing when that happens. Even as a Christian, how many times has someone come into me with brotherly love and said, you may want to check what you're doing? And I poo-poo them off. It's happened several times in my life. Now, like I said, if someone comes to me with something of that nature, I have to step back and evaluate. Or ask them, give me a little more example, please, so that I can see exactly what you're talking about. Otherwise, I'm not sure how to correct it in my own life. Godly correction is a pearl, though it may sting for a moment as Christians when your fellow brother and sister come to you and say, hey, you may want to check what you're doing. Like I said, when I talked to my advocate, Rick, and he brought something to my attention, it stung. But after evaluation, he was right. And now I sit there and pay attention a lot more before I open my mouth and let junk flow out. 2 Corinthians 4, verses 3 and 4. And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, in whose case the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving so that they may not see the light of the gospel and the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Our pearls of the precious gospel. When we try and talk to others who don't understand it, it may confuse them and open us up for ridicule, open up the gospel for ridicule. And that bothers me, because to me, in my own humble opinion, if I'm trying to help you in your life to know God, why make fun of it? Why tease it? Especially if you can see in my own life when I'm not bothered by a whole lot of things. Jesus did not say this to keep us from being discouraged about spreading the gospel. Previously in this sermon, Jesus told us to let our light shine before men. Matthew 5, verses 13 through 16. You are the salt of the earth, but if the saltiness has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor does any light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. You see, no matter what, even if they're not ready to hear the gospel, you still have to live your life the way that you're supposed to, so that they can see how God is working in your life, so that they can come and ask, and then they can be ready to accept it. The Holy Spirit's constantly working on everybody throughout the world, preparing those hearts, softening those hearts, and opening up those hearts and eyes to hear and see and absorb what's taking place. When we find such open hearts, we can trust that God's already been working on them, and boy, they'll accept a lot of stuff that you tell them. Matthew 7, verses 7 and 8. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. We see a progressive intensity going from ask to seek to knock. Jesus told us to have that intensity and passion and persistence in prayer. The fact that Jesus came back to the subject of prayer here when he says ask, which was already dealt with in some depth, shows the importance of prayer. Ask for it. Be persistent. In this threefold description of prayer, as asking, seeking, and knocking, we see different aspects of prayer. And different aspects is the reward. Prayer is like asking in that we simply make our requests known to God. And everyone who asks receives. Receiving is the reward for asking. Prayer is like seeking, as in us searching after God, His Word and His will, and he who seeks finds. Remember what God has told us numerous places in the Old Testament. Example, Deuteronomy 4:29. But from there you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find Him if you search for Him with all your heart, with all your soul. If you search for God under any circumstances, He's there and you will find Him. It's impossible not to. Finding is the reward for seeking. And prayer is like knocking until the door is open and we seek entrance into the great heavenly palace of our great King. And this reminds me, I said, the Sermon on the Mount as a whole, you find it all throughout Jesus' ministry, all throughout his parables, all throughout his everything that he did and said. And it reminded me of that persistent knocking of the one neighbor who had a person come over to their house late at night, and he went to his neighbor's house and knocked and knocked and knocked until he got up to give him some bread. It was persistent. Entering through the open door into the palace is the reward of knocking, and the best reward of all. The idea of knocking also implies that we sense resistance. Sometimes when we pray to God and we're asking for the wrong thing, and God doesn't give it to us, and we continue and it still doesn't happen, isn't it telling us something? Isn't it telling us that this is not what God has for you? It's a resistance. If the door were already open, we wouldn't have to knock. If we're knocking and the door is locked, and it's not going to be open to answer for a prayer or something, then what does it take to get in? To become a burglar and find burglar tools? Good luck breaking into that door. It ain't going to happen. It may be that I'm a little stubborn and I might try and break in, and I might be to the point where I'm pounding on the door and just not knocking. But at least I'm smart enough to know to continue to knock. And one day God will take away the stubbornness to where I go, oh, I'm sorry, God, you're right. That was not something that I needed or something that you intended for me. God promises an answer to those who diligently seek Him. And after all, God doesn't want any of us to perish. Not one. If you knock as an unbeliever, He will open that door and welcome you with loving, open arms. Many of our passionless prayers are not answered for good reason. Like I said, God may look at it and go, you don't need that mega winning lottery. You don't need them fancy cars. You don't need that home that's more than you can afford. God has our best interest. And persistent prayer does not overcome God's stubborn reluctance. It gives glory to Him, expresses dependence on Him, and aligns our heart more with His. Be persistent. Continue talking to God. That's what He wants us to do. Matthew 7, verses 9 through 11. Or what man is there among you who, when his son asks for a loaf, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, he will not give him a snake, will he? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give what is good to those who ask Him? Jesus made it clear that God doesn't have to be persuaded or appeased in prayer. If it's something that's good for you, it's something that you need, He's going to give it. He's going to. He wants to just not give us bread, but even more than we ask for. Thankfully, the times we ask for something as bad as a serpent without knowing, He doesn't give it to us. Because He knows it's harmful. He spares us the just penalty of our ignorance. Ecclesiastes 6:12. For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his futile life? He will spend them like a shadow. For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? It is blasphemous to deny God's answer to the seeking heart when we imply that God is even worse than the evil man is. When it's something that we need, God will always give you more than you need. He supplies everything. Matthew 7:12. In everything, therefore, treat people the same way that you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. The negative way of stating this command was known long before Jesus. It had long been said, you should not do to your neighbor what you would not want him to do to you. But it is significant advance for Jesus to put it in the positive, saying to treat people the way that we want them to treat us. He reversed it. By doing this, Jesus made that command just a little bit broader. It is the difference between not breaking traffic laws and then doing something positive like helping a stranded motorist. This especially applies to Christian fellowship. If we would experience love and have people reach out to us, we must love and reach out to others. And Jesus shows that this principle, that as we commonly call it the golden rule, he shows and summarizes all the law and the prophets to say about how we should treat others. There was this dude that was one of the later Roman Empire head guys, Alexander Severus. He was an emperor about 300 years after Jesus died. 300 years. And he loved this saying, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And he put that inscription everywhere in the kingdom that he ruled. It was on buildings. It was all through his house. It was in his prayer closet. And he applied it to everything that he did. The Jews loved this dude because he was extremely fair in what he did. And he applied this into everything. And when he did this, he was honoring Christ. And he favored the Christians, even though he was not a Christian himself. It still falls in line with the great commandment that Jesus gives in Mark 12, verses 28 through 31. One of the scribes came and heard them arguing and recognized that he had answered them well and asked him, what commandment is the foremost of all? And Jesus answered, the foremost is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. They go hand in hand. Jesus didn't change his mind from the sermon to later on in his life. Jesus didn't say, well, use the golden rule. The golden rule falls right in line with this. And this, we know, was talked about way in the past in the Old Testament. If we would simply treat others the way we want to be treated, we would naturally obey all the laws, everything that the law says about our relationships with others. This makes the law easier to understand, but it doesn't make it any easier to obey. No one has ever consistently treated people the same way that you want them to treat you. Ever. I read a thing on Facebook yesterday. Actually, I read two things which really kind of made me smile. And they both kind of went along the judgment that we talked about at the beginning of the message. And one of them that says, when you judge others, you are not defining them. You are defining yourself. The other one that I really enjoyed, and I'll close with this little joke. There was a cowboy who went for his first time into the big city, to a big city church. And he came back to the cowboy camp and he was telling them all about his experience. And he says, I drove my old pickup and they made me park in the corral. And Cowboy Charlie said, who was more in tune and up to date with the common ways, said, you mean the parking lot. That's where you parked your truck. And he goes, and then I had to get out and I had to walk up the trail to the building. He goes, Cowboy Charlie says, no, you walk down the sidewalk. And he goes, and I got to the door and I was met by this dude. He goes, that was the usher. And he took me into the lanes, and he told me where to sit, and he goes, that was the aisle. And he says, so I sat down where he pointed to me to go into the chute, and he goes, that's called the pew. And Cowboy Joe said, that's the same thing that the fancy pretty lady said when I sat down next to her. Pew. Don't treat others in such a manner. Don't judge them at all. Don't think that we're better than anyone else. Because when we do, it's just like Bob Marley said, be prepared. Others are judging you. Let's go to prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today's lesson.